I want you to vividly picture the quiet tragedy of the modern corporate retirement party. A 65-year-old worker, physically exhausted by decades of relentless stress, stands awkwardly in the center of a sterile, gray corporate break room. They have surrendered 40 complete years of their finite, valuable human life to a corporate machine. Their physical energy is depleted, their joints are aching, and their youth has permanently vanished into the dark void of human history.
40 years.
The corporate manager hands them a cheap plastic cake, shakes their hand, and wishes them a happy retirement.
Finally.
The exhausted worker goes home, sits in a dark room, and finally logs into their celebrated traditional retirement account. They stare blindly at the digital glowing number on the screen. It is the exact number they were promised would buy them absolute geographical and financial freedom. But then, terrifying reality aggressively sets in. When they mathematically calculate the devastating destruction of 40 years of unchecked central bank inflation and factor in the terrifying physical cost of modern medical survival, they realize with pure horror that the glowing number is an illusion. The money they saved simply cannot purchase what it could decades ago. They are 65 years old, physically broken, and they mathematically do not have enough capital to actually survive the rest of their natural life in dignity. Today, I am going to violently expose the greatest, most highly calculated corporate heist in the entire history of modern capitalism. From the exact moment you received your very first corporate paycheck, the highly organized financial system aggressively brainwashed you into believing in the deeply toxic concept of the traditional 401k retirement plan. They convinced you that generational wealth is built by blindly handing over 10% of your daily human labor to greedy, invisible Wall Street mutual fund managers, locking your valuable capital inside a heavy iron vault until you are too old to physically enjoy it. In this highly structured video, we are going to violently deconstruct the terrifying mathematical reality of the Wall Street lockup illusion, explain exactly how the global financial system legally steals your capital through unjustified administrative fees, and show you how the untouchable masters of the economic universe engineer their empires by absolutely refusing to ever participate in this toxic middle-class psychological prison. And if you stick with me until the absolute end of this reality-shattering video, I will give you the exact psychological escape plan to violently assassinate your reliance on the traditional retirement matrix, aggressively unlearn your deeply ingrained fear of managing your own capital, and forcefully transition from a bleeding corporate investor into an untouchable, mathematically lethal master of private equity and daily cash flow. To comprehend the magnitude of this psychological trap, we must deeply analyze the dark historical origin of the standard 401k plan. You must understand that this celebrated financial vehicle was never designed by compassionate experts to help the working class achieve true freedom. Let us travel back in time to the late 1970s. Before this era, large corporations offered traditional pensions. A pension was a mathematical guarantee. The corporation carried the absolute burden of the investment risk, and they legally promised to pay the worker a specific monthly salary from the day they retired until the day they died. But the corporate titans and highly sophisticated financial engineers realized that promising to pay an exhausted worker a guaranteed salary for the rest of their natural life was mathematically destructive to their corporate bottom line. The corporations were bleeding capital trying to maintain these massive pension funds. They desperately needed a legal loophole to completely escape this financial obligation. That loophole arrived silently in the Revenue Act of 1978. Deep within the tax code, a tiny provision known as Section 401k was written. It was originally intended simply as a minor tax dodge for highly paid executives to defer taxes on their bonuses. But then, a ruthless corporate consultant realized the true terrifying potential of this obscure tax code. They realized that if they aggressively marketed this code to the working class as a revolutionary new retirement benefit, the massive corporations could permanently eliminate their highly expensive pension programs. They executed the most brilliant psychological marketing campaign in financial history. They shifted the massive burden of lifelong retirement directly onto the financially illiterate shoulders of the working class. They invented a toxic system where the uneducated worker assumes 100% of the terrifying global market risk, while the global corporation completely washes their hands of all long-term financial responsibility. If the global stock market violently crashes and burns the day before you retire, the corporation is completely safe, and you are left to starve. The system desperately needed a psychological hook to convince the working class to voluntarily hand over their valuable daily capital. They invented the concept of the corporate match. They told you that if you contribute 5% of your salary, the generous corporation will match it. They call it free money. But you must look closely at the terrifying mathematics of this manipulative illusion. That matching contribution is absolutely not free money. It is simply a calculated fraction of your own overall compensation package that the corporation is violently withholding from your physical paycheck in order to aggressively incentivize you to participate in the Wall Street ecosystem. They use this psychological bait to convince you to surrender your liquidity. Once your capital crosses the invisible threshold into the traditional retirement account, you have officially entered the Wall Street slaughterhouse, where the true mathematical extraction immediately begins. Let us take a deeply horrifying mathematical look at the exact mechanical fee structure of the traditional mutual fund and the deeply toxic Wall Street investment matrix. The traditional financial advisor and the brokerage firms portray themselves as your trusted partners, navigating the complex global markets on your behalf. This is a highly advanced, weaponized, entirely legal extraction mechanism designed by brilliant financial engineers to systematically bleed your valuable capital dry over a 40-year timeline. When you blindly hand over your hard-earned physical capital to a Wall Street institution, you are assuming 100% of the massive downside market risk. But the highly greedy, sharply dressed Wall Street fund manager sitting in a luxurious high-rise office building absolutely does not assume a single ounce of risk. They structurally guaranteed their incredible wealth by actively charging you a mandatory, inescapable administrative management fee every single year, completely regardless of whether your massive portfolio goes up or violently crashes into the dark earth. You must deeply understand the terrifying mathematical reality of the expense ratio and the assets under management fee. The financial system intentionally makes these fees sound microscopic. They will aggressively tell you that they are only charging you a tiny 1% or 2% annual fee to manage your valuable money. The deeply asleep middle-class worker hears the word 1% and assumes it is mathematically irrelevant. But they are completely blind to the highly destructive mathematical concept of inverse compound interest. If you invest your capital over a massive 40-year timeline, and the global market returns a theoretical historical average of 8%, that tiny 1 or 2% fee does not simply take 2% of your massive final total. Because that fee is aggressively extracted every single year from your total principal and your accumulated growth, it actively prevents that stolen capital from compounding over the next several decades. When you mathematically calculate the true cost over 40 long years, a seemingly innocent 2% management fee will literally cannibalize and devour up to 40% of your absolute total potential investment returns. You are surrendering nearly half of the wealth generated by your entire lifetime of human labor to an invisible financial manager who does not care about your human survival. You take 100% of the risk, you provide 100% of the original capital, and Wall Street mathematically steals 40% of your massive upside. It is the greatest legal robbery in human history, but the most deeply evil, highly calculated mathematical weapon utilized by the traditional retirement industry is the psychological concept of the absolutely locked vault. The system highly intentionally penalizes you with massive, terrifyingly high destructive tax penalties if you dare to attempt to physically access your own hard-earned money before you reach the arbitrary, mathematically engineered age of 59 and a half years old. If you experience a medical emergency, or if you discover a lucrative private business opportunity and you need your own capital, the Internal Revenue Service will aggressively slap you with a massive 10% early withdrawal penalty, in addition to highly taxing the entire distribution as ordinary income. You must profoundly ask yourself exactly why the heavily protected global financial system cares exactly when you decide to spend your own absolute money. They aggressively lock your valuable capital completely away because they actively need your physical liquidity to fund their massive daily global operations. They use your deeply asleep capital to mathematically leverage their elite corporate deals. You are absolutely nothing more than a highly cheap, incredibly free source of global corporate liquidity, perfectly securely chained exactly inside a highly corporate financial prison. The system knows that if you possessed immediate, untaxed access to your own highly valuable capital, you might actually wake up, aggressively withdraw your funds, and start building your own massive private empire. So they erected a psychological electric fence around your money, utilizing the terrifying fear of government tax penalties to ensure you never touch your own human energy until your physical body is too old to pose a threat to the corporate establishment. We must violently expose the incredibly devastating psychological tragedy of the massive opportunity cost. The asleep middle-class worker voluntarily surrenders their highly valuable seed capital during the exact massive specific decades of their biological life when that specific capital possesses the maximum mathematically explosive potential for global compound growth. During your incredibly physically energetic 20s and your massively productive 30s, you possess the human energy required to actively build a scalable digital software business or to successfully acquire a cash-flowing commercial real estate apartment building. But instead of actively, aggressively deploying that highly specific, valuable seed capital to heavily build a private global empire that you mathematically, physically control today, you blindly hand that massive capital over to the Wall Street lockup machine. You passively trade the mathematically unlimited powerful upside of true corporate ownership for the toxic illusion of a perfectly safe retirement exactly 40 long years in the deeply invisible theoretical future. You must profoundly understand that the true, untouchable, absolute masters of the incredibly massive economic universe absolutely never ever participate in the toxic traditional 401k lockup matrix. The billionaire class and the true global elite absolutely despise the highly dangerous emotion of blindly handing their highly valuable capital over to a mathematically unaligned, greedy mutual fund manager. The true global elite aggressively view the massive global economic world as a highly structured game of absolute mathematical leverage, extreme physical liquidity, and absolute private ownership. They absolutely do not wait patiently for 4 decades, passively hoping that invisible stock markets gracefully provide a perfectly average, exactly 8% annual yield. The elite absolutely demand total control over their massive human capital. Let us completely thoroughly analyze the highly disciplined, entirely robotic mindset of a true, mathematically lethal private equity master. Instead of locking their valuable cash inside a highly restrictive government-approved retirement account, the true financial elite utilize highly obscure, massively powerful strategies like high cash value dividend-paying whole life insurance, commonly known in the elite circles as infinite banking. They heavily funnel their massive liquidity into these highly specialized private contracts because these specific vehicles mathematically guarantee the protection of their massive principal while aggressively providing tax-free compounding growth. But the absolute most terrifying, highly powerful feature of this elite strategy is absolute massive physical liquidity. The elite can aggressively borrow against the massive cash value of their private policy at any given moment, completely tax-free, without ever incurring a single internal revenue service penalty. They take their own valuable capital, use it to aggressively acquire cash-flowing commercial real estate, and then mathematically use the rental income from the real estate to pay back the loan on the policy. Their money is actively working in 2 massive geographical locations at the exact same time. They absolutely control the velocity of their valuable money. They are not waiting for 59.5. They are aggressively compounding massive wealth right now, today, in the real physical world. The terrifying mathematical reality is that waiting patiently until exactly age 65 to finally begin living your physical human life mathematically guarantees that you will only correctly fully enjoy the incredibly physically painful, deeply exhausted, fading absolute winter of your valuable time. By the time the massive traditional system legally allows you to access your depleted, heavily inflated capital without violent tax penalties, you no longer possess the massive physical human energy to travel the global world, build an aggressive business, or truly enjoy the fruits of your lifelong physical labor. You have successfully funded the Wall Street machine, enriched the invisible mutual fund managers, and sacrificed your own massive human potential on the altar of traditional corporate obedience. If you are listening to this exact specific sentence right now, and you feel a heavy physical iron blindfold violently ripping off your exhausted face, realizing that your entire financial life has been aggressively dictated by toxic emotional blind hope in the traditional Wall Street lockup machine instead of cold, ruthless mathematics and true private ownership, you are officially stepping out of the toxic casino of the asleep middle class. But I must issue a very serious, urgent psychological warning right now. Violently assassinating your deeply ingrained cultural belief in the traditional retirement planning system is an incredibly painful, terrifying, deep psychological process. Your highly conditioned, entirely biological human brain will violently, aggressively fight you, desperately begging to return to the deeply comforting, fake, highly emotional fantasy of the completely safely locked vault. You must be absolutely mentally prepared to endure this terrifying, massive psychological withdrawal in order to secure your permanent, absolute, massive mathematical freedom and entirely reclaim your own highly valuable sovereign human mind and actively control your absolute seed capital today. Grab a heavy iron pen and a blank piece of physical paper right now. Eliminate absolutely all deeply toxic physical distractions around you, violently turn off your glowing, brightly colored television screen, and strictly prepare to execute this actionable, highly structured step-by-step escape plan to permanently violently assassinate your toxic heavy reliance on the traditional Wall Street 401k lockup machine. It is time to aggressively unlearn your emotional toxic relationship with greedy Wall Street managers and forcefully transition from a highly drained, heavily bleeding, blindly funding investor into an untouchable, mathematically highly lethal master of private equity. Rule number 1. You must radically and violently reprogram your entire deep psychological relationship with the fake societal concept of the traditional 65-year-old retirement. You must permanently stop participating in any financial system where the massive structural mathematical control of your valuable seed capital is actively stacked aggressively against you. I am not providing individualized licensed financial advice, but the mathematically aggressive sovereign producer deeply understands that they must immediately stop violently bleeding their excess capital into the Wall Street lockup. Many highly awake producers mathematically reduce their traditional retirement contributions to the absolute mathematical minimum required to capture the corporate match, because leaving the match is leaving part of your salary on the table. But every single highly valuable dollar beyond that absolute basic match is aggressively redirected away from the Wall Street prison and forcefully funneled directly into highly accessible, massively liquid private brokerage accounts or highly protected elite cash value vehicles. You must violently swear absolutely off blindly funding traditional locked vaults, completely abandon emotional blind faith in greedy Wall Street managers, and absolutely refuse to ever again aggressively hand your highly valuable physical capital over to a system built on mathematically locking you out of your own money. Your new permanent, highly protected goal is to only actively deploy capital into systems where you mathematically exclusively possess the absolute, undeniably massive structural control. Rule number 2. You must aggressively initiate a massive, relentless, aggressive campaign to completely transition your entire physical, financial existence from the vulnerable, deeply asleep consumer of traditional lockup vehicles into the absolute, highly protected, mathematically secure owner of private empires. You must violently redirect your massive, valuable human, physical, financial capital into aggressively building massive, highly scalable, incredibly complex digital systems, and acquiring highly valuable, heavy cash-flowing physical assets that generate massive structural cash flow today, regardless of random daily global stock market events. You absolutely must stop aggressively trying to accurately predict the highly volatile, completely random, massive short-term, erratic movements of the incredibly complex global financial markets 40 long years into the deeply invisible future. Instead, you must aggressively, completely focus your absolute valuable time and capital on building a massive, highly impenetrable, heavy titanium corporate business structure that generates massive liquid cash entirely today. If you take the exact thousands of dollars you are blindly throwing into a Wall Street index fund and aggressively invest that exact same physical capital into acquiring high-level digital marketing skills, purchasing cash-flowing online internet properties, or entirely acquiring distressed commercial real estate in highly emerging global markets, you mathematically accelerate your massive path to financial sovereignty by decades. Rule number 3. You must embrace the absolute, undeniable, highly structural superpower of absolutely ruthless, highly advanced robotic execution of mathematical leverage. The absolute greatest, most highly lethal financial weapon you completely possess is a highly disciplined, entirely perfectly controlled human mind, emptied of all massive toxic financial anxiety and blind emotional hope in traditional Wall Street promises. When you actively, aggressively deploy your valuable massive capital today, whether you are analyzing massive, complex structural commercial real estate business deals or deeply studying specific obscure mathematical digital software models, you absolutely must operate exactly like a completely cold, highly efficient, massive private equity master. You must mathematically size your highly calculated positions to guarantee that absolutely no single random negative daily Wall Street outcome can violently destroy your massive overall global financial empire today. The elite understand that true wealth is not measured by the theoretical size of an untouchable retirement account, but by the massive, undeniable physical amount of liquid cash flow that highly aggressively enters their private physical bank accounts on the exact first day of every single month. Let us thoroughly summarize this brutal, incredibly mind-bending, mathematical absolute reality before you go out and take massive, life-changing, aggressive action today. The traditional societal concept of blindly funding the 401k lockup machine and entirely blind emotional hope in a traditional 65-year-old retirement is a highly structurally designed, highly efficient, deep, psychological trap. They aggressively and constantly weaponize your natural human desire for future safety to legally aggressively extract your incredibly valuable human capital today, converting your natural deep desire for true freedom into deep, highly predictable structural corporate revenue for incredibly greedy fund managers. The traditional societal behavior to constantly, aggressively, blindly fund volatile, high-risk Wall Street accounts while completely ignoring the undeniable structural power of exact mathematical leverage and absolute private control of capital, today is the absolute most deeply dangerous, highly toxic, and mathematically destructive lifestyle in the modern world. It mathematically guarantees that you will remain a highly drained, constantly bleeding target, permanently trapped on an incredibly deeply exhausting, rusty, heavy iron hamster wheel of endless emotional financial desperation. The absolute only possible mathematical way to completely win this heavily rigged game is to violently unplug yourself from the massive, highly toxic traditional retirement casino, aggressively embrace incredibly highly calculated private equity, and forcefully adopt the invisible, untouchable, godlike lifestyle of a mathematically completely disciplined global producer, exactly like a true master of the absolute economic universe. If this deeply terrifying, incredibly reality-shattering, massive mathematical information finally opened your highly exhausted eyes, if you feel like I just violently ripped you out of the highly toxic, incredibly massive, traditional retirement lockup machine, and finally handed you the absolute dark structural truth about exactly why the untouchable global elite completely always win today, then I absolutely need you to violently destroy that massive blue like button and aggressively subscribe to the channel right now. You absolutely cannot afford to miss the extremely high-level, highly aggressive wealth-building mathematical strategies we have coming up next on this massive, reality-breaking, highly advanced channel. And speaking of massive, highly complex financial traps that are specifically engineered to violently, completely control your daily behavior and mathematically absolutely guarantee that the exact same massive corporate system violently, heavily, aggressively extracts massive, completely unjustified emotional compliance from your everyday decisions. If you truly want to deeply understand the absolute biggest, most highly manipulative, mathematical, incredible lie ever told by the massive, incredibly traditional consumer credit scoring system, and exactly how the highly standardized, structured concept of the standard credit score is a massive, incredibly toxic psychological prison designed entirely, completely to absolutely measure your absolute obedience to debt, you absolutely must watch this incredibly massive, highly specifically structured video right here on the bright, glowing screen. In it, I completely and incredibly, ruthlessly, violently break down the absolute ultimate banking compliance illusion, and I show you exactly why the true, incredibly highly advanced global elite completely refuse to care about their personal credit score, choosing instead to aggressively leverage massive commercial debt to build massive, highly complex private global empires they mathematically entirely control today. Click that massive video right now. Your incredibly highly absolute future, highly calculating, absolutely untethered, and permanently financially free self will eternally thank you. I will entirely, completely see you over there on the absolutely other, massive, highly specific side.